This is going to have nothing to do with the coronavirus epidemic. This is called Battling Giants. Sometimes I get sucked into reading a book because of its subtitle, and that was definitely the case with David and Goliath, Underdogs, Misfits, and the Art of Battling Giants. The basic argument of the book is that sometimes a great advantage is only apparently so, and sometimes a severe disadvantage can be the key to a victory. The set piece of the book, of course, is the famous fatal combat between David and Goliath, between the little shepherd boy and the gigantic mercenary, a professional warrior, an absolutely classic mismatch. And, as the author Malcolm Gladwell says, it really was a mismatch, but not in the way most of us think. Most of us have Goliath as the heavy favorite. But a brief inspection of the matter shows that it was David who could not be beaten because of his weapon, the sling. It could launch a heavy stone over a long distance with remarkable accuracy and terrible effect, and David was very proficient in its use. He would not have to close ground with the giant and participate in any test of strength. As it happened, there was no test at all. David threw a rock, it toppled Goliath, knocking him senseless, and David killed him on the spot. Gladwell's point is that many times we don't have a clear understanding of the true terms of a contest, and so we tend to favor the one who looks to be the mightiest. I recently watched a video of the boxing match between the then Cassius Clay and Sonny Liston. I also remember the fight in real time. Many people thought that Liston, the champion, an ex-con who was angered at being mocked by his opponent before the fight, was going to kill the man, beat him to death. The famous Liston scowl had a lot to do with it, too. Clay countered with mugging, posturing, poetry, and prediction. The fight, seen as a serious mismatch, proved to be that, only it was Clay who dominated, just as he said. If Liston connected 3 times in the fight, that was a lot. True to his word, Clay danced, punched in flurries, opened at least one cut, and made poor Sonny look ugly, falling off balance with his lunging punches, sweeping wildly and hitting only the air. I think the reason given for him not coming out to answer the bell in the 7th round was that he had separated his shoulder. Who knew with Sonny? And the next fight was even more of a maze, but it is entirely possible that one of those wild swings he took at his elusive opponent might have thrown his arm out. Certainly, at the end, with the beating he was taking, his heart was gone. I'd read another book by Gladwell about the tipping point. I thought it was a fascinating concept, but I didn't think much of the book. Not a good read. As I recall, it was dry. This one, too, got into tables and graphs, and it jumped around, but there were some very convincing cases presented. He made the point that clear disadvantages, adversity, can be turned to advantage for the stout of heart. Using dyslexia, he showed how 2 men became successful, not in spite of that limitation, but because of it. They had learned how to live with it, work around it, and trick their way into promising situations. One became a Hollywood producer, the other the head of Goldman Sachs. There was a very interesting examination of the civil rights movement in Birmingham. Success for the activist hinged on provoking the Public Safety Commissioner, Bull Connor, into acting like Bull Connor. It took some work, but they did it, producing the famous photograph of the vicious dog tearing into a young boy, and the cops opening up on the crowd with water cannons. Gladwell maintains that the black leaders jumped for joy when Bull released his dogs, and also that it was a hot, sticky day, and after being hosed a block up the street, the people got back up into a party mood and went back to be hosed again. Things are not exactly as they seem, and power does not always prevail, not in Birmingham and not in Northern Ireland either. The part of the book that made the deepest impression on me was about a doctor who had a terrible childhood. He became an imposing figure, belligerent, caring only about getting his way. I think he was fired 7 times. He was put in charge of children afflicted with leukemia. Because of his limitations, like David, he was the perfect person for that job. He found it impossible to study for a cure because the children were all bleeding to death. He thought he could stop that with multiple transfusions. No one agreed with that approach, but he went ahead with it, and the children stopped bleeding to death. At that time, there were 3 main biochemical agents used to treat the disease, but they were considered ineffective by the experts because they were each very dangerous and none of them cured the leukemia. The doctor proposed combining them along with another new lethal drug. He was ordered to stop. The doctor in charge was horrified by his approach, foreseeing that his hospital would be blamed for killing many children. The doctor was mocked by other doctors, Harvard hotshots, for his absurd theory. He pressed ahead and 2 kids died. He persisted, adjusting the dosages, and made some progress. He thought the blood testing method then employed did not register the complete results he wanted, so he opted for bone marrow tests once a month without anesthetic, driving a huge needle into the top of the shin bone, taking the bone marrow while the screaming child was held down by several assistants. He proved to be right, advancing the treatment of what was considered a hopelessly fatal disease. Gladwell maintains that he never would have pushed through if he had not suffered his hellish childhood that enabled him to endure pain, doubt, and the scornful opinion of others, however expert they were held to be.